Hello, I'm Anthony. Welcome back to the Arturia Matrix-12-V tutorial series. Another preset deep dive for you today. Going to have a look at this lumbering sync preset. That's what it sounds like. This is a mono synth. And we can see why when we have a look over at the voices page. We're in unison mode. So uni-last means the last key that we pressed is going to be the one that we hear. So you can see me basically holding the E down. That's what uni-last does, and we're using two voices. So the combination of these two voices is adding thickness. You can also see that they're slightly panned. So we've got multiple different pan settings, and that's just providing that extra kind of color or flavor to the sound. If I turn one of those voices off, it's going to get thinner. And obviously it's going to be panned. Here's the second voice coming in. Little bit of inherent detune between the two voices accentuates that, that lovely colour. Okay, back on the main page itself, the next most important thing to be aware of is that this is a synced sound. Now the clue's in the title, it's called lumbering sync, but it's really important not to forget this stuff because you can end up making false presumptions about where the different kinds of sounds are coming from. Oh, we're using two oscillators, you know, there's going to be some sort of detune between them. These oscillators are synced together, so they're generating the same pitched sound. If I change the frequency of BCO2, different tonal colour to the sound, it always stays exactly the same pitch. That's the nature of sync. You can also see that both oscillators have the pulse and saw waves engaged. And the fact that we're using pulse waves here is going to be important when we come to have a look at the modulation matrix. So a large part of the depth and complexity of this sound is coming from the fact that we've got two oscillators on two different voices. Now the voices detune is going to override the fact that these two oscillators have been combined together. They're outputting a single sound. Then the voices layer comes over the top. So that detune is genuine. The slight difference between those two completely composite sounds is going to produce that, that little bit of tonal variance. But inside the sound itself, these two oscillators are really working synchronously. They're working in harmony. I'm going to turn the modulation wheel all the way down. Press a key. Here's the mod wheel coming up. Now we're obviously getting vibrato, but there's other stuff going on with this sound as well. Oh, just before we go any further, I should have done this right at the outset really, it doesn't matter. But can you see that pedal 2 is mapped to VCO1 frequency? This is the expression pedal. I don't have an expression pedal plugged into my keyboard. If I turn this modulation off, the pitch is going to drop, but that's all it's doing. So I'll just take that out of the equation. I'll clear the preset completely so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Okay, back to the mod wheel. Turn the mod wheel all the way up at the moment, so we're getting this really violent vibrato, but there's other stuff as well. This is the first instance we've come across with vibrato being used as a modulation source. So the output from vibrato is just a control voltage. I keep saying this over and over again. When you're figuring out how all of these various modules of synthesizers plug together, particularly something like this, which is operating in a kind of semi-modular way, this Matrix-12, all of this stuff is just control voltages. The vibrato is sending this signal, however big it is, however big the final output signal, after all of your different, how much mod wheel is turned up, how hard have I hit the key, everything else that you can configure turns into an up and down. It's literally as simple as that. That vibrato modulation source is applying a negative modulation into the filter frequency. So we're actually doing something to the filter cutoff. We're pulling the filter cutoff down periodically using the vibrato. I think when we covered the vibrato, I said treat it like an LFO. It's just something that goes up and down. So let's have a look a little bit more closely at the filter frequency, and we'll try to parse the relationship between vibrato and that component. Well, here's our filter frequency in the modulation page, and you can see we've got 3 different mod sources. Here's our negative vibrato modulation. We also have a second negative modulation source coming from polypressure. This is how hard you press into the key on your keyboard if your keyboard's got polypressure. Those 2 negative modulations are being offset by envelope 1. Now, envelope 1 is a pretty simple envelope. It's got quite a quick attack, a relatively slow decay, so we're getting right up to maximum, then pulling down to 52 sustain level, which is quite high. So the envelope is, to all intents and purposes, applying a more or less constant positive modulation, and that's being counterweighed by a combination of polypressure pressing deeply into the key and also the vibrato that's fundamentally coming from our modulation wheel. Let's turn the modulation wheel all the way down. Press a key on the keyboard. So we're getting no vibrato to speak of. Let's have a quick look at the vibrato module. Its inherent amplitude is 0. All of its modulation is coming from the mod wheel. So at the moment the vibrato module is doing nothing. I'm also not pressing hard into the key. So we're getting no negative modulation. In other words, this huge number being supplied by envelope 1 is doing almost all of the work, well in this case actually all the work on the filter frequency cutoff. I pull this down, there's no positive modulation being applied to the filter, and so we're basically just left with the filter doing its own thing. You can see we're in notch mode here, so we're basically cutting a scoop out of the frequency. Have a look in the spectrum analyzer, bottom right hand corner. Here it is. Here's the notch. If I throw all of those preset changes away and get back to our basic preset, I'll just disengage the expression pedal again. So this is native out of the box. Here is our cutoff. It's a pretty bright cutoff because the envelope is doing so much hard work. When I increase the modulation wheel, we're going to apply some of that negative modulation. We're going to pull the cutoff back a little bit. When I press deeper into the key, we're going to apply yet more negative modulation, pull the cutoff further back again. Here we go. Turn the modulation wheel up. Hard to see, isn't it? Because now we've got all of this vibrato modulating the pitch of the sound, but it's also brought the cutoff back. And finally, I'll press into the key. So here's me just pressing the key gently, and now deeper in, and there we pull the cutoff back. So you can see and hear me pressing, releasing, pressing, releasing into the key. This is a great example of a default positive modulation and then having that modulation amount attenuated or pulled back by 2 different negative sources. Pull the mod wheel all the way back down. Throw all those changes away. Get rid of my expression pedal. Now we're not done with our examination of vibrato yet because we've got this value over here, and at first sight this looks a bit weird. Vibrato is tied into VCO1 frequency. Well, vibrato is fundamentally tied into frequency, and if we have our oscillators synced together, any modulation that we're applying to VCO1 is also being applied to VCO2 in a roundabout kind of way. So why on earth do we have this explicit mapping over here? Well, it's because the hardwired vibrato module has the capacity to have a smaller overall effect than the VCO1 frequency modulation, which has a wider range of control. The easiest way to demonstrate this is for me to press a key, turn the modulation wheel all the way up, and make it as intense as I possibly can. The maximum pitch that we're getting to when I press this C on the keyboard, doesn't matter what the original note is, but you can hear that it's going up about half an octave. Now if we head back to the main page and I dial more of this in, there's a much greater capacity to modulate the pitch of the oscillator. So this explicit mapping over here basically just gives the vibrato module the capacity to do more work than it would otherwise be able to. And that's our examination of vibrato dealt with. So let's throw the preset away. And now I'm going to dial that out so that any changes I make to the modulation wheel now aren't going to be applying any more of this extra vibrato. I'm also going to disable the vibrato itself from inside the voices patch. So having taken all of that away, this is what we're left with. I'll increase the modulation wheel. Can you hear that vibrating sound? Come back down now. The modulation wheel is doing something else. Let's have a look at what it's doing. Well, it's lever 1. It's doing two different things. Let's deal with LFO 1 first. Here it is. Triangle wave, operating about halfway on the speed level and full amplitude. So whatever this thing is doing, it's doing as much of it as it possibly can. What is it doing? It's modulating both VCO1 and VCO2 pulse widths. So pulse width of VCO1 is set to minimum and the modulation amount is a positive one. VCO2 pulse width is set to more or less, well, close to maximum, and it's a negative modulation. So these two pulse widths are traveling in opposite directions. All tonal effects of both oscillators are fully in play when we're in sync mode. It's only the pitch of VCO2 that's being disabled. So if I increase this modulation to its maximum extent, we'll play with the speed. Then you can hear periodically the tone of the sound as the pulse widths are increased and decreased in opposite directions. At very high speeds, you're approaching something like almost an FM kind of effect from an FM synth. Totally different effect. It's just, you know, it sounds like that. So that's what LFO1's doing. Let's get rid of that. So that was the speed of the pulse width that we were modulating with the modulation wheel, not the amount of it. It's always on, it's always doing something, but the modulation wheel was basically increasing or decreasing the speed of modulation. The other effect that the modulation wheel is having over here is an amount. Let's have a look at LFO2, another triangle wave with zero amplitude. So the entire effect, whatever it's doing, is coming from the modulation wheel. What's it doing? It's basically acting as a tremolo system. In other words, increasing and decreasing the volume of the output. Here's the VCA. This is our effectively the last thing in the chain. You see our good old envelope 2 into VCA2. So this is the primary sound engine, the thing that lets sound through, and when we turn it up, get the, you know, the standard constant sound. So we're modulating that with LFO2. Let's try to catch it. Here's modulation wheel all the way down. There's the tremolo coming in. This is the speed of the tremolo. And as I slow it down, you can see in the spectrum analyzer the overall volume of the sound going up and down. You can also see, as a matter of interest, every time I press the key, there's the envelope applying the filter sweep. And then we settle down into the tremolo. Pull the modulation wheel back down. Tremolo goes away. LFO3 is a red herring. It's in the modulation matrix, but when we head over to LFO3, you can see that the amplitude is 0. So this is one of these kind of archaeological relics from the preset deep dive. The sound designer, whoever was designing this preset, was obviously doing something with LFO3. It's not actually in use in the final preset. I always like to think of these things as Easter eggs to see if there's anything interesting that can be had. In this particular case, not much, because it's just a tremolo effect. There it is. But it's not actually having any effect on the primary sound without us manually going in and overriding it. Great stuff, throw that away. Velocity tied into envelope 2, we've already seen that. That basically gives us our volume control. And envelope 5, what's it doing? So we have 0 attack, very fast decay, down to a 0 sustain level. So this is doing something with VCO2 frequency. Remember, VCO2 frequency in a hard synced environment is a filter control, not a pitch control. Let's mess around with some of these numbers and try to catch it. So there's me accentuating the effect just by making the decay longer. We're getting more of that filter sweep. So this is a negative modulation. Let's have a bit of a play with the modulation amount and see what we can get. Don't forget, I've messed with these numbers. It's much more extreme than it ordinarily would be. And all the time the pitch isn't changing. It's a filter control. Brilliant. With the decay much faster, we just get that extra little bit of colour right at the beginning every time the key's pressed. Lovely, throw that away. Finally jump over to our FX unit, see what we've got. We've got a delay with ping pong, so you can hear the ping pong effect bouncing between left and right. And that's the end of the deep dive and the end of the series. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please check out the Patreon and YouTube channel member links below. Awesome way to help support my channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.